Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
It's Monday again.
It is indeed, yes.
Weekends go faster than weekdays, don't they?
Seems like it, yeah.
But since we have a good time all week long, it just doesn't matter that much.
That's right.
So what do we want to talk about today? Same old stuff, but with a little bit more emphasis on one issue. We talk a lot about coronavirus, what lockdown has done to our country, what it's done to the kids, what it's done to our nursing homes, and all the harm done. But you think they've had enough. Governors are moving back. The governors that didn't lock down, they were successful. They're held out as hero. They may become president because of that. So all these good things. So the evidence is so clear.
Yeah.
So we should be moving in the right direction. But it doesn't seem like that's happening. You know, even in states where there's been some relaxation of the regulations, like in Texas, are the people excited about it, and everybody really pushes it to get rid of their masks? Some of them, or a lot of them, are still wanting to wear the mask. It's almost like they've been turned into zombies. They just put them on, and its safety is to protect us against illness and protect our kids. The whole works. But that seems like we still have a problem. And right now, what is in news today especially is our friend Robert Wenzel had an argument to bring up the subject of something we've talked about, but with a little different emphasis. But we've worried about vaccines, and what they can do, and using them as passports and more. And this is something that is very, very real. But the one thing that Robert pointed out was the fact that our government might be working on one from the White House on determining how to get this vaccine passport, and that can be no good. So I don't know if they're going to get away with it. It seems like, I used to always think that when they first came out with the financial reporting, it was so big and cumbersome, the records were so big they couldn't handle them. But that seems to have changed. They know everything now, and my guess is that they probably know enough about universal passports for everybody. So they're going to do it, and it looks like it's moving along. The government's behind it, and of course they marked on there, Daniel, guess what it's going to cost? It's free.
Yeah.
Everything is free, just like the vaccines that they've been getting. They've been conditioned, and everybody come in for a jab, didn't hurt, and the complication, few here or there, in the thousands now. You don't read about that, so you're not going to really have an option and make a decision, except for the numbers that are out there. There's always some, but there always will be people who can see through this stuff. But my opinion is equal to the opinion of the real experts that we read, and that is, it has nothing to do with COVID and health safety. It has to do with government surveillance. It has to do with an attack on liberty. So I would say that is a very, very serious matter. And some people who have, been talking about this for a long time consider this one of the worst situations. And I've often compared what's going on today to what happened in the 20th century. 20th century was horrible.
Yeah.
Abuse of civil liberties and war and depressions and people dying by the millions. But there's something very subtle about it now, that it seems to be so structural. It's almost makes it legitimate to talk about, could people reverse the trend of Western civilization if you're going back thousands of years and seeing progress? And now, if this is truly a split, a reflection going in the opposite direction, what does that mean? And a lot of people have said that, and there's times when, as bad as it was in the 20th century, there's something different this time. And this universal passport, vaccine passports, is pretty scary, especially with the technology available to this day and age. It means that everything will be traced and recordable. Social media will be helpful. Cell phones will be helpful. And intimidation will be helpful. Gullibility about the people, that'll be helpful.
Yeah.
But anyway, we have a job if our effort and pretense is to try to wake up some people and say, freedom is something good and very natural, and everybody is better off with it. And to simplify it, what we're advocating instead of all this nonsense is do whatever you want as long as it's peaceful.
You know, the Israelis have given us a model, sadly enough, of what it looks like. They have essentially developed a national vaccine passport where you wear this little bracelet. It's not a gold star this time. It's a bracelet to show that you've been vaccinated. And if you don't show that, if you can't show that, you're not allowed to participate in society. And we've talked about it on this show before. It's very, very chilling. It's very abusive. The government of Israel is very abusive toward its citizens. You know, it wasn't long ago that if you suggested the U.S. might be rolling out some kind of vaccine passport, they would say you're a conspiracy theorist, anti-government conspiracy theorist, therefore you're off of social media. But now we found out just a couple of weeks ago, or just recently, that New York has already rolled out its own, the Excelsior Pass. So if you want to go to Madison Square Garden, you want to see a concert, you want to see a boxing, you got to show that, prove to the government, the state, that you have a right to be out in public. And now we're looking, let's look at the first clip. This is from the Washington Post. Very chilling. The White House and private firms are developing plans for vaccine passports. You know, because it's really messy if each state has a plan and this and that and the other. So we need a national plan to make it fair for everyone. Everyone will get their opportunity. We don't want any poor minority communities not signing up for this. But let's do the next one, and then we'll do a quick clip, and I'll pass it over to you, because here's the next clip. This is from Naomi Wolf. She's very, 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 very good. She comes from the progressive side, very strong on civil liberty. She says, please understand, a vaccine passport is the social credit system. It takes one tiny back-end tweak to keep your score based on what you say on social media. Turn off your PayPal or Apple Pay if your score dips too low. This is the platform. And she went on Fox News, Dr. Paul, I think over the weekend, where she talked about it. And this clip's a little longer than we usually do, but what she said is so important. I think we're going to maybe watch 50 seconds of this the whole clip. So let's put it on if we can.
I am not overstating this. I can't say it forcefully enough. This is literally the end of human liberty in the West if this plan unfolds as planned. Vaccine passport sounds like a fine thing if you don't understand what those platforms can do. I'm CEO of a tech company. I understand what this platform does. It's not about the vaccine. It's not about the virus. It's about your data. And once this rolls out, you don't have a choice about being part of the system. What people have to understand is that any other functionality can be loaded onto that platform with no problem at all. And what that means is it can be merged with your PayPal account, with your digital currency. Microsoft is already talking about merging it with payment plans. Your networks can be sucked up. It geolocates you everywhere you go. Your credit history can be included. All of your medical history.
It's great to see you're coming up with this, because if we're going to defeat this, we have to have a coalition between libertarians, the libertarian-minded left, people like named Dr. Wolf, Glenn Greenwald, and others.
You know, they have to use an excuse to get the people to go along. And it seems like way too many people are going along. Way too many people went along with lockdown. And the people who objected to it got their political leaders to agree with them. You know, the certain states stayed open and they did better economically. Herd immunity came in a natural way, became equally so. Deaths rates and infections were not any different from one state to another, but the people were better off and they didn't have to succumb to looking to the state. So conditioning people to a point where they depend on the state for everything is part of the problem, and that's been going on for a long time. It's been around for a long time too in different societies, but it's very strong now, because even now when the state and the governor's moved back on some of these regulations, people are turning against their neighbor because they want to continue to do it. It doesn't make any sense. But they will try to convince people that they need to do it. It's for, they'll argue that it's for safety, to, make sure that children don't get infected, take care of people in nursing homes, all these things. Safety is it. It's always for the children, this sort of thing, which is just a bunch of baloney, really. They'll continue this nonsense about coronavirus, but they're running out of steam on that. That's why they have to create these new viruses. There's 4 or 5 new versions of the coronavirus. They're got to keep scared, or otherwise they might think being free is a worthwhile adventure. But not if we're being attacked. If we're being attacked, we need the government, and they will use. They will use national security reasons too. Just think after 9/11, that was terrible. But mostly what they did was against the American people, and said we're doing it for national security, and that's why we had the lockdowns at the airport. And they're convinced that the health argument is one of the strongest for people to go along with it, and they'll even use it at times to protect liberty, saying, well, we want to make you safe and all. But it reminds me of all this effort to keep us safe and secure. It reminds me of a cattle rancher who might have thousands of heads of cattle, and keeping them safe for the slaughter, is very, very important. And they take care of the animals, and then they lose their freedom, of course, too. And that's what happens here. People do want to be safe; it's natural, but they've lost the whole understanding that liberty takes care of those problems a lot better than government. When the government has so much to be in charge for, guess what it does? It motivates people to be in charge, because there's always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of the people always want to be the elitists because they understand that it's bad for others. Libertarians, I think, should feel confident about the positiveness of our philosophy and about liberty. But that's completely different, because ours is not saying we want to control you to make you safe and secure and happy. We want you to be free, which is exactly opposite of the elitists who want to get into government, well motivated. We have to take care of the people by taking away their liberties. So this is a big issue, because this, to me, and to so many others, and I know you agree, this is a really major attack on liberty. And if they can get away with this, boy, I'll tell you, all they'll do is they'll have a couple decades of refining it so that they can continue it and make sure there's no disobedience, and like Naomi pointed out, those who are disobedient will be punished, and that's why we need. I wish I was an orthopedic surgeon and I could transplant backbones.
Backbones.
Give them a backbone.
It's ironic, for both parties being so obsessed with hating China, they're now adopting one of the worst aspects of the Chinese political system, which is the social credit system. But the one of the other things that you notice, though, is the mistaken perception. And I was reading a poll. I don't have it on here now. I'll try to link it to our description. But it was asking people their perceptions of what percentage of what age group died from COVID. And one of the results was Americans believe that the people over 70 constituted 50% of those that died from COVID. The reality is it's 92% of those who died from COVID are in the over 70 group. And the young people, they said about 50% of young people died. The fact is it's 0.02% or something of that. You have a real problem with propaganda and perception. But the HHS, which is going to be eagerly working with the administration and the private sector on this, this is full of the people who have been wrong about COVID from the very beginning, the people who've said everything that's proven to be incorrect. They've been proven wrong, and I think they're seeking revenge. But we do have little laboratories of liberty in the country, and I think South Dakota is one of those. Later on, Florida became one of those. Now, Texas, with a lot of flaws, is sort of becoming one. But here's an even better laboratory of liberty. Let's do this next clip. This is somewhere near and dear to your heart, Dr. Paul, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Pennsylvania. The Amish community in Lancaster, Pennsylvania becomes the first in the U.S. to achieve herd immunity after reopening churches led to 90% of households being infected with the virus last year. Now, this is from the Daily Mail reprinting an Associated Press article. So then it goes on to say how bad it is that they've done this. But what happened is that the members of the Amish church got together in Lancaster County, where they're very strong, and they said, hey, we're not going to follow these guidelines. We are going to go with a different approach. We're going to trust our bodies. We're going to trust the bodies God gave us, because they're a very religious community. And what happened, 90% of the families have got it. They got over it. They didn't all die out, there's no question, because we certainly would be hearing about it if they did. And so now they basically have gone over it and achieved immunity. So they have to ask the question, if the so-called health experts had only allowed that to happen across America, with, of course, protecting people that needed or wanted protection, maybe we would have been where the Amish are right now, and we wouldn't be talking about vaccine passports, COVID restrictions, masks, but maybe that's kind of what they wanted, to keep us on a tight leash.
Yeah, and if they had done that, of course, that it would have passed. But if there had been a lot of deaths, believe me, it would have been on the front page, on the top of the news every single day. But it didn't happen, and you point out those numbers, which are very accurate. But I was thinking about right now, what's going on now, especially I would say in the last several elections, a presidential election, but lying and cheating in elections, it's been known for a long time. I mean,
we know a little bit about that.
We can go back, but anyway, just think about going to the polls. So let's say they don't want you to come to the polls, and they'll put you. They'll put something in your passport that shows that you're a Second Amendment guy, aren't you?
Yeah.
You believe in the Second Amendment. Well, strike, and like Naomi was pointing out, a strike against you,
yeah.
And it'll do that. So and also governments are the deciders of what is truth and what is not true, and they determine this. So what goes into these things, it's the government that's going to tell you what they're going to put into that. So it's interesting. One thing though that I don't think they've answered yet. A few people have made comments about it, and that has to do with voting. One beef that most honest people would say, only citizens should vote. They should be registered and they should be identified. Just for common sense reasons. You should know who's happening, instead of maybe saying, well, if you don't identify them, maybe they can vote 6 times instead of once.
Yeah.
So identifying is a good idea. But this looks like, if you were running an honest operation, you say, well, what we need now is when you come in to vote, we want to see your passport, or we'll want it, or do whatever they need to read your passport, and they will identify you. Now, it seems like there's a group of people in this country that wouldn't be too anxious to it, or they would at least welcome a discussion on voter ID. I mean, this whole idea that we use the Social Security number, not that those are a good thing, but what they've put up with and still put up with, and yet at the same sense, the one thing you cannot ask for identification on is somebody who wants to vote. So could it be possible that if this thing sort of worked and they were this much honest with it, maybe they could actually say, we can, if you're going to vote 3 times, we're going to know about it, and we're going to find out if you're a registered citizen or whether you're an illegal or whatever. But for some reason, I don't think this will be the route to reassuring most, or a lot of the people in this country, including myself, that there's not always honesty in our election.
Yeah, that's for sure. And in fact, libertarian activist Maj Touré had a great tweet this morning, if we can put it up. He kind of captures it, as you do in Twitter, in a real short nutshell. He says, so let me get this straight. Voter ID is bad, but a vaccine passport is good. And he's kind of like rubbing his chin. So it was a very good one. But, all joking aside, what else could be put on those? Certainly, with the administration's focus on domestic terrorism and domestic terrorists, does anybody believe that it's too far away that anyone involved in the January 6th insurrection would have that noted on their vaccine passport, and they would find maybe they couldn't go buy another gun. Maybe they couldn't go to a movie because they're too dangerous. They couldn't go within 100 miles of Washington, D.C. Remember, in the Soviet times, you had your own internal passport, and it restricted you to with a certain amount of miles from where you had to live and work because you were assigned to work and you couldn't leave. If you wanted to go to Moscow or St. Peter or Leningrad, you had to have a special mark in your internal passport, your internal ID to do that. If that's where we're heading, and if that is indeed the case, if people don't stand up against this, the America that we knew, even though we've already seen it change over the past year, will distort so far that we won't even remotely recognize it as the country we knew.
You know, it's often been said when there is a program and it's expensive, just follow the money and you'll figure it all out. But right now, it wouldn't be too easy to follow the money because everything is free.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
We know where it originated, you know, the $6 trillion that they spent last year or so, where it originates and who it really hurts. You know, the money is printed, it's passed out for free, and the poor people end up paying it through inflation. But in the short run, who profits from it? Well, there's a group of people called Big Pharma.
Yeah.
Now, is there any chance, Daniel, I'm just asking, really to speculate, is there any chance that Big Pharma may be a big promoter of passports, vaccine passports?
Yeah.
You know, they were behind the control of the drugs you can't use, the ones that didn't cost much money.
Well, also big tech, because I think IBM is working with the state of New York to deal with theirs, and they're notorious for being horrible at data protection. IBM is. So all your stuff is going to be out there. Private companies are going to know all of these things about you, and it doesn't look good at all. But do you want to move on from here?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to go back to Texas a little bit. You know, I have to admit, Dr. Paul, I've been pretty gloomy, but I think we've had a little bit of good news. Just anecdotally, I went out to a Buc-ee's, a big favorite of Texans. You know, I'm not going to say where, but they didn't have any sign in the window, and I went in. It was about 85% of people with no masks, and so I was very happy about that. My family went out on Saturday night to a large chain that happened to have one place here in Lake Jackson. No masking sign. A restaurant, no mask sign. They walked in, they said it was weird. It was just like normal. Nobody said anything. The only thing they were depressed is that people were wearing masks that were serving. But so that's a little bit of good sign. But remember, it was only a couple of weeks ago when the fearmongers said, oh my gosh, if Abbott opens Texas, it's going to be a bloodbath. In fact, Beto O'Rourke, who's, let's don't put that on yet. He said that Abbott lifting the restrictions shows the Republican Party is a cult of death, is what he said. And here's what he tweeted at the time. We can put it on now. He called opening Texas, if we can, yeah, he said it's a death warrant for Texans. Abbott is killing the people of Texas. Amazing. Let's look at the next tweet, Dr. Paul. Here is back on Planet Reality. Texas's COVID numbers fall for the 17th consecutive day, following Governor Abbott's 100% reopening of the state and lifting of the mask mandate, a move Biden infamously called Neanderthal thinking. Next one real quick, because it's always good to visualize these things. Here is where CNN said Abbott's anti-science decision to end the mandate. That's on March 3rd. You can see over there on the very right. He lifted it on the 10th. Guess what? It continued to decline. Let's do another. That's current hospitalizations per million. Let's do the next one. The blue is hospitalizations, and the orange line is percentage of beds in use by COVID-19 patients. If you look at what happened, Texas has fallen to mid-June numbers. And one more, the last one, before I throw it back to you, Dr. Paul, and this is the Texas Hospital COVID-19 Intensive Care Unit Census. This is Alex Rodriguez. He's out of Texas and does terrific work. If you look when that mask mandate was lifted, when Texas was completely reopened, including bars and restaurants, et cetera, to full capacity, there was not a death, cult of death. There was not a mass death. Abbott wasn't killing people. And we don't want to predict what will happen because we don't know what will happen with this virus. There could be a seasonal increase. It's possible. But the fact is they've all been wrong continuously. That's the one thing that we can point to.
Well, they need fear. They can't proceed with the activities that they're doing now. So they have to have fear. They'll get new fear, and they're already working on it. This whole idea of variants that Fauci doesn't seem to quite understand.
Yeah.
That is the tool that they need, and this has to be very frustrating to them. Why aren't you fearful? And then they can look at the statistic when we look at them, that they're not coming in a direction of common sense fast enough, and yet we see a trend away from the fear mongers. But then they can shout and shout and shout, and the shouting, when it's incessant and when it's all social media, big tech, television, mainstream media, is always the same thing: to be scared. Be scared. You have to be scared because it's so dangerous. That sinks in, and there's a lot of people are more receptive to that type of activity. But then there's a lot of people, Daniel, and you've run into them, I know, people who will be out there, they have no more desire to put on these masks and do all these things. And sometimes you read pretty sad stories about, a person that maybe a single mother that has a job, and all of a sudden they say you have to wear your mask to keep your job, and to be thrown out in the street, and she's the only one taking care of her kids. That seems to be too much of a sacrifice for her, and you can understand why she's unfortunately what should be done is people should be offering people like that up for another job. But it is complicated. But people should remember that the fear is usually government manufactured so often because, there's always going to be fear, and there's been fear around for thousands of years, and there have been other ways that people, handle fear by education, reassurance, good science, and also with spiritual life. People can get relief from fear, but not if you're an authoritarian. You have to have the fear because authoritarianism depends on it and a certain characters. People say, well, the whole country went nuts. Yes, it went nuts because people were confused and they couldn't do it. But the people who were really, really promoting this, I still believe there's only a small number of people. And that is the reason why I think we have a chance at switching things around, because you have to have energetic, well-informed, small number of people in leadership positions who may be like Naomi Wolf.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, she's been around, and she's credible now, and she's speaking out, and people not, from, say, a conservative libertarian viewpoint, they might, I read all her books, and she's real anti-wars, the reason I got interested. So other people from that group may start saying, well, if Naomi said this. And so that's why leadership, whether it's for the good guys or the bad guys, very, very important. And unfortunately, the bad guys have so much influence through the instruments of distribution of information, when it comes to social media and the mainstream media, and the educational system, like our universities.
Yeah. Well, you talk about government-mandated fear. Now, if you could look up in a dictionary or Wikipedia, if you could look up that term and there was one photo associated with it, it would be this next clip. Let's put it on government-mandated fear. It's Fauci again. He's back in the news. Here's what he said over the weekend. He warns parents against children playing together without masks. Children who make up a tiny, almost infinitesimal percentage of those who even get the virus or get sick with the virus. Talk about someone so desperate to retain that narrative, to retain how pathetic, to retain that position of power, that he would do something so cruel. We went out to Seawolf Park up by Houston over the weekend. It was very sad. Most people were out and free. We were out there having a picnic. It was so sad to see a young family, very small kids, and they had them all tightly masked up, out there in the space. So Fauci would give you a thumbs up, family, if you're out there listening. They're probably not. But anyway, I'll just finish by saying, once again, I'm going to put a link in the description. Please sign up for our free updates. We're not going to reveal your names and numbers and this and that, just so we can keep in touch. We don't know what big media is going to do if we continue telling the truth. They're not really interested in that. Big tech doesn't like us very much. So we can keep getting in touch, and I'll have a link, and please sign up for free Ron Paul Institute updates.
Very good. A lot of people are interested in liberty, but they're frightened by it because it's too much freedom, too much responsibility, no proof that it will benefit it. But no, the evidence is out there. The societies that have been freer, just like we cite here, and Daniel come up with the statistics very well. You know, if a state does this, this, and this, they're better off. No, it didn't, like a wand, eliminate influenza, but it meant that it changed things to the point where people didn't suffer as much. And that's really what we need to do, is move people in that right direction so that they can. But the rules aren't complicated. That's the reason why I think that our message, if it takes a lot of writing and explaining what freedom is all about and why it works, I think there's a natural instinct for people to be free. All you have to do is look at a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, or a teenager, and there's a natural instinct to be independent-minded, you know, and to me, and when people realize that the societies and individuals do better when they have a sense of self-reliance, and this is what is the evidence is that way, because the more socialistic and more communistic a country, the worse the people suffer. You know, they're the ones who really suffer. Where in the freer countries, sometimes there's been examples in our history where countries stayed out of World War I and World War II because they didn't want to get in a fight, and they always ended up better financially. But the rule is easy to remember. You know, of course, we talk about the non-aggression rule, don't, initiate force against other people. But if you describe that in a positive way, what can you do? And it's very simple. What you can do in a free society without violating any moral principle is anything peaceful. Now, that's not complicated. Anything peaceful. And then you say, well, what if that person doesn't do well? What if he drinks too much? What if he does this? What if he's a gambler? And what if he doesn't take care of his health? That's true. It could happen. But what happens if a government's instructing people and they do what they did to us in COVID lockdown? So yes, they could do that. But anything peaceful means you're not going to hurt other people or other people's properties, other people's belief. You're not going to interfere, and there'll be a natural tendency for the society to be much better. So yes, no aggression, but just think of things about anything peaceful, and I think it's a natural instinct. I happened to be around a lot of families and young people and took care of medical people and delivered babies, and most of the people I met, they were looking for peaceful things and were delighted to have family events and didn't think they had to be in this struggle to find out who's passing out the fear and what are we going to do about it, and totally ignore the principles of liberty. So I may think it's simple, but obviously we have a little work to do to spread this message. Not my message, because this message has been around for a long time, but I think it's an important message, especially today, because if you look at all this nonsense and the way Naomi described this passport, vaccine passport, that if you say, well, is there any harm done? Yes, this is not peaceful when you take away somebody's liberty. So I suggest we just look more carefully at the principles of liberty and realize that there is an easy road to peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.